Hello everyone. Please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. If you have, here's your high five. Let's get going. But yeah, I know this isn't like a lot of my other videos, but I'm still hoping that you guys are going to enjoy. So basically, I took a modern women writers class for the fall semester at my school. Now I know I titled this video gender studies course, even though that might not necessarily technically be considered one, but basically gender studies refers to the study of analyzing gender identity and gender representation. And while I understand that reading books just written by women wouldn't necessarily fall under that category, we did actually frame all of our readings sort of with the idea of this article that we read, which was called Performative Acts and Gender Constitution, an essay in phenomenology and feminist theory, which was written by Judith Butler, like years and years ago. It was about 14 pages, and it was a lot of words that I'm not sure all made sense in the order that they were placed. But if I was to take away anything meaningful from it, it would probably be that because like male and female is necessary for the continuation of the species, we form sort of these gender norms. And because it's necessary, we also have societal punishment for those who go against these gender norms. But these norms are sort of arbitrary, and thus we actually should dispense with them and should also dispense with the idea of a woman itself. I'm not entirely sure that that's what she was arguing, but that's what I took of it and could make of it. So basically, that's sort of the framework that we had going into a lot of our readings. And I actually have these in backwards order. Um, but in the class itself, we actually read 4 books, which were Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson, The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and lastly, Sula by Toni Morrison. Next semester, I will be taking a Representing Women in Literature, which will be part 2 of this video. So if you like this one, obviously be sure to subscribe and we'll get on that. But I guess I should start with the first book that we read, and we actually read this one over the summer, and that was Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. So the story follows 2 young girls named Ruth and Lucille, who are abandoned by their mother at their grandmother's house. Very quickly in the story, their grandmother ends up dying, and so their transient aunt, Sylvie, comes to take care of them. The main focus of the book is sort of this coming of age of the 2 girls, as Lucille grows into a more typically feminine role and is accepted by the town, whereas Ruth grows more like her transient aunt, Sylvie, and so their differences eventually end up even breaking family bonds. So I can see why people like this book. If you're really into like visual art, then this would be the book for you, particularly landscapes. I unfortunately don't like landscape paintings that much, so it was a bit annoying to read pages and pages upon dreary gray color of the rain, or the way the sun parted in the clouds. Now, I know descriptive language has an important role in literature, but as someone who cares more about general themes and ideas and the plots of a work rather than its descriptive use of language, Housekeeping wasn't really for me. The actual plot is fine. It's pretty slow. It's the standard coming-of-age story with not a ton of twist going on anywhere. Despite being relatively short in word count, the book feels a lot longer than it actually is. It's a good book to pair with a class on gender norms, because it has an all-female ensemble for starters. Most of these books really just have women. And the characters give readers various viewpoints into what gender performance can look like. So if that's something that interests you, then I would give this book a shot. And it's probably a lot less painful than other books with that same sort of theme. So I'd give it probably like a 4 out of 10. You should read it if you want. The next book that we read was actually my favorite of the ones that I had to read for this class, and that was The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. This is not a single narrative, but it's actually a collection of individual stories that all take place in the same location, obviously Brewster Place. And it ends up getting connected in the final couple of chapters. The stories give readers a chance to both explore gender issues as well as racial issues, as Brewster Place gives an analogy for white acceptance, where despite Irish and Mediterranean success, the Black community seems to be stuck back behind a literal wall. So perhaps not as influential as some of other books like The Color Purple or The Handmaid's Tale, which also came out in the 1980s along with this book. I'd actually argue that this outshines both of those. The actual word choice and writing style is not particularly complex. It's a very easy read, but she creates meaningful characters and weaves actually impactful narratives together. After reading the first chapter, I cried a little, and I feel like that's always a marker of a good book, as if it actually makes you a little sad when you finish somebody's story. It's a novel that's grounded in reality. The character stories can be devastating at times, while forcing readers to accept the individual flaws of the large cast of characters. There's an overarching theme of the Black experience in America, as I mentioned before, but there are also a lot of sub-themes in this one, such as parenthood and colorism. Every character has a different viewpoint, and they're all treated with respect, which was something that I really liked about this book. Is unlike some of the other ones where people are seen as good and bad, everybody in here has a flaw, but is also typically a good person, even though they have very different outlooks on life. And it also kind of keeps this book from seeming political, which can happen with some of these books. We'll talk a little bit about The Handmaid's Tale. But so while this isn't the type of book I would normally go for and read and enjoy, I think it's great, and I genuinely appreciate it as a decent piece of literature, so I would probably give this a 7 or 8 out of 10. If you like these kind of books, I would definitely recommend this. I'd probably recommend it even if you don't really know a lot about these books and want to get into it. So unless you know that you hate these kind of books, I would probably recommend this one. So the third book we have is probably the one that most people clicked on this video for, and that is, of course, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This story, of course, I'm sure people are aware of it. They made a TV series out of it, which is really popular right now. But the story follows a woman in a conservative theocracy who is forced into something approaching prostitution. It's not quite prostitution. But for my project, actually, I wrote about military prostitution in South Korea. We had to do this project thing anyway. But she's forced into prostitution in order to solve the birthing crisis. Margaret Atwood herself states that she wrote this as sort of an anti-prediction, so that what she describes in the novel won't actually happen in real life. However, her novel talks about a lot of different things, including truth and language, which is another thing I wrote my essay about. Power plays a big role in this novel, and of course the role of women. Otherwise, why would it be in this class? So Margaret Atwood made it a rule for herself that she wouldn't write anything that hadn't actually happened in real life, and because of that, on some level, her book feels incredibly real. I actually surprisingly really enjoyed her writing style and her use of language. She describes sort of a feeling rather than just direct actions, and she has a slightly unreliable narrator, which was interesting, especially at the end when it's revealed that the story is actually a combination of tape recordings. However, in terms of societal commentary, the book falls flat in a lot of... It's okay, but there's a lot of problems with it. She combines things that are real and have happened, but she puts them together in a way that they don't, really fit together, so it feels off. The combination of religious teachings in Gilead, for example, are literally directly contradictory, and she comes up with interpretation of biblical passages that I've never seen any Christian come up with literally ever, and I am very much a student and fan of theology, so I feel like if it was a thing, I would probably know about it. She also notes... because her idea is sort of anti-conservatism, which is why I'm noting particularly conservative ideology that feels off in here. But she also labels them as ending up withholding the Constitution. But at least in my experience growing up in America, they seem to be the ones that are really Constitution lovers and wouldn't decry it as a safety. I would think maybe if this were written shortly after 9/11 or something, but it was written in the 1980s. I don't know the context, because I wasn't alive in the 1980s. It felt especially weird after the pandemic, but obviously she couldn't have predicted that, so I'm not entirely blaming her for it, but especially to a modern audience, it feels a little bit off. I don't think it's completely something that couldn't potentially happen, but I think based on the current world, especially since this was set in America, so especially in current America, it feels like in America we have much greater problems that could lead to dystopia than what she prescribes, which makes it feel weird that people use this book so much as like this is what we're living in right now. It's clunky world building is really all that I'm saying. But if you are really into feminist ideology as the root problem of society, then I think you could probably enjoy this book because it's not bad. I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. It's better than average. It's worth a read. But if you want a good dystopian book, I can give you like 7 that are better. So I'm not sure this one's worth it for the genre that it's in. But, if you want to read it, it's very popular right now. So it's probably a good reason to read it. The last book we have is Sula by Toni Morrison. This story is about 2 young girls named Sula and Nell who grow up together, and they're very, very close as young children. But then Sula leaves for 10 years and becomes what I can she goes off to college, but I can kind of only describe her as like an absolute menace. I think the book literally says that the townspeople, it happens in this town called Bottom, describe her as evil when she comes back. Like they see her as like this sort of evil presence. So I don't think an absolute menace is such a far cry from what she is, but she thinks pretty much solely about herself. We'll get into why that's weird, but anyway, Nell becomes what the town sort of expects of a woman. She gets married, she's sort of more proper, which is a lot more like her mother is sort of like that as well. Then Sula comes back and basically sleeps with Nell's husband, and then you can imagine the drama ensues, which in the end, spoiler alert, Sula ends up dying in the end. I was pleasantly surprised by this book, but that doesn't mean that I liked it. I just liked it more than I thought I was going to. I read The Bluest Eye last year, which was also by Toni Morrison, and that was absolutely terrible. Like, it was literally a -1 out of 10. Like, it was bad. Sula is a lot better. Thematically, it's a little weird because in a lot of ways, Sula is the protagonist. We talked about likability in class. She's an unlikable protagonist, but depending on your reading of it, you can really get the sense that she is a bit selfish, and it sort of seems as though Morrison is saying that we should be selfish, and I guess part of that is that women should be more selfish. They're always giving themselves up to other, but Sula just seems a little bit too much of an extreme example. Like, she literally kills 2 people on quasi-accident, but it's like I'm not sure I really want to be emulating her, but it does have a decent story about self-discovery, of course some analyses about racial and gender relations, and of course the discussion of likability. It still is overly grotesque and weird, which seems to be a style of Morrison, at least in the 2 books that I've read, displaying multiple death and sex scenes, though in this one we don't have the rape of a child by her father from the perspective of her father, the rapist, so that was a definite improvement, especially since that other scene had no thematic or plot purposes. I really don't know why she included that in The Bluest Eye. I just don't read The Bluest Eye. It sucks. But we're gonna give Sula that. Still, this book is worse than average. It's probably a 2 out of 10, maybe a 3 out of 10. I'd probably skip it unless you really want to read a Morrison book, and I would definitely read this one over The Bluest Eye. But yeah, so that's all I have for you guys today. Hopefully you enjoy my discussion of these books and seeing what the youth of today are learning in their classes. If it wasn't obvious, I'm not really the type of person that's ever going to be really into this type of literature, but if you like my perspective, certainly be sure to subscribe and watch part 2 when it comes out in a couple months. Bye!